Hello everyone, my name is Kirill. Today we're going to take a look at Vite, but first I need to explain some theory to you. I think everyone who clicked on this video basically understands why we need bundlers and how they differ from CLIs. So when we use create React app or generate an app with the Vue CLI, we'll look at how our application is built with Webpack. Next, we'll look at how we can create an application using Vite, and then we'll go over how to migrate from Webpack to Vite. Well, and naturally, let's look at the advantages that we have. Those who have worked with Webpack probably know that Webpack simply bundles the application for us. Here we have an example project. I've put together a small project for this. Everything here is written in TypeScript. Well, actually, it's just that TypeScript is being processed. There's no actual TypeScript in the project itself. In other words, I didn't write just an index.tsx file, but that's not really important. When we configure our Webpack application, we need to create a Webpack config.js file. We can see that there are a lot of different parameters here. Here we need to specify how images will be processed, how fonts will be handled. Next, we define how styles will be processed, which loaders we need to connect, and how we will handle our CSS and SCSS. Then, how we will process TSX files, and which extensions we support for JS. We can also see here where we will store our final bundle, which plugins. What is the essence of the question? Webpack simply bundles our application. Vite does things a bit differently. To start with, Vite realized that our dependencies don't change that often during development. That's why it links them once using ESBuild. ESBuild is also a bundler, but it's faster than Webpack or Parcel. That much we understood. Next, Vite requests our modules everything we import as ES or ESM. In other words, these ESM modules are processed natively by Vite. This allows the browser to handle the actual bundle. And as a result of all this, when we request our modules as if they were ESM, so for example, when we simply do an export of our app here and insert another component, if we change our app, there won't be a rebuild of the entire application like with Webpack. Instead, only the specific part that we modified will be rebuilt. Now, we've looked at a React Webpack example to see how it works. We can see that when we started our application, it took 2 seconds. That doesn't seem all that long, but if you use just create React app, it will take much longer. Now let's see what it looks like if we use Vite instead. To do this, we need to run npm create Vite at latest. It asks us for the project name. Let's call it Vite project. Next, we can choose which framework or library we want to use. We can pick absolutely anything we want, and that's actually a really good thing. Vite is, after all, a bundler agnostic tool. He doesn't care at all what we collect. Let's select TypeScript. And that's it. That's it. Our project is already ready. Next, we go into the directory with cd Vite project, run npm install, and then npm run dev. We can see that our project started up in 334 milliseconds. If we compare that to Webpack, how long did it take with Webpack? 2 seconds is 334. Vite will always be faster by default. This is very good and really helps with performance. So right now, honestly, I would recommend, if you're choosing between build tools, to consider Vite as an interesting and high priority option. All right, basically here we have pretty much the same thing as in my project. Here is just hello world, but here we also have images and a counter, as you can see, already being displayed. And in the case, well, when we're working with Webpack, let's say we have a task to add a preprocessor. For example, we had plain CSS, but now we need SCSS. We go into Webpack, config, write Sass or SCSS there, specify which loaders we use, and add additional configurations. With Vite, it's completely different. To process our file, for example, we had app CSS here, but now we need CSS. So let's say we rename it to SCSS. Let's see what happens. Naturally, there will be an error. But here, we haven't changed it yet. So for example, if we already changed it here, we see that we get some kind of error. All right. To fix all this, we just need to install the dependency that we don't have. We were told that we need to install Sass. Let's finish downloading. Again, we run the project. We see that everything has started up. So it's very convenient that we don't have this kind of configuration spaghetti, which can be quite complicated for beginners. And Vite allows you to simply install whatever you're missing and start working with it right away. For those who know and understand, it's somewhat similar to Parcel. It's the same story with Parcel. There aren't any big specific configurations there either. You just install the modules or libraries you need and work with them. Also, if you need to handle any non-standard behavior, Vite allows you to add plugins, both official and unofficial ones. There's a define config, which allows us to connect plugins right here. In what situations is this convenient, and in what cases will you still need to interact with the Vite config? But the moment you want to run your application in something like Internet Explorer or an old browser, your application simply won't start, it just won't open, because the JavaScript code is quite modern and is processed as an ESM module. Naturally, in what's it called? In Internet Explorer, none of this is supported. Naturally, the Vite team was concerned about this before releasing everything and developed the legacy plugin, which helps us run our code in Internet Explorer. To install the plugin, we need to type npm add vite.js plugin legacy, and in the configuration, we need to specifically specify legacy. In other words, here we can specify how we want to handle. For example, Internet Explorer, we can indicate which browsers to process and how to process them. So we've realized that in principle, this is quite an interesting solution because it simplifies and speeds up the build process for your front-end application. But there's a problem. Right now, a lot of projects have already been written using Webpack. So what should we do? Naturally, we can migrate from Webpack to Vite. There are, well, you need to perform a certain number of steps, and then you can start working with Vite. How do you do that? Let's copy the project. All right. We see that we have the same project. Where do we start? We'll start by deleting Webpack config. Next, in package JSON, we need to specify the module type so that we can import our modules as native ES or ESM. After that, we need to install the dependencies, React, Webpack migrate. We install our dependencies. Next, we change package JSON to specify how we'll run our application. We'll switch to Vite build and Vite serve. Next, we need to create a Vite config JS file. Here, we also need to configure how we will work with our code. In other words, we need to specify which folder will contain our code and which folder will contain the build. We already had a build folder, so we'll keep using it. To work with React, we need to install the Vite plugin React, specify plugins here, add the React plugin, and we'll be able to process JSX and TSX components. And we'll also specify our static files, that is where they will be stored. We'll do this simply by setting public dir. It would also be necessary to install Vite plugin HTML to process our HTML and set up its configuration. So to migrate from Webpack to Vite, we use the Vite config TS configuration file. In this file, I changed JS to TS. In this file, we specified the root directory as src, then set the build folder next to the public directory from which we can access our files, and then aliases, so when we write src, we can refer to our components. Next, there are two plugins. A plugin for processing our GSX. Well, TSX and GSX are also used for components, but just in case, I specified it so you understand how to handle, for example, some niche libraries in React, like styled components. Then there's the create HTML plugin, basically an HTML plugin, so we can work with our HTML. Next, I moved index.html into src. Here you need to add script tags, set the script type to module, and specify index, TSX. And now, here we can directly write our code. So let's take a look, basically. All right, let's run npm run dev. We see that it takes 347 milliseconds, whereas if we do all this with regular Webpack, it takes 2 seconds. We can see that the time gain has immediately increased. Also, if we want to process something like Sass, it's much easier to set up than with Webpack. In other words, learning Vite is much simpler. So as we can see, 347 milliseconds for the build is very fast. We can see that basically everything is working. So if you enjoyed the video, subscribe, leave a like, and tell your friends. Thank you.